International Media TV. Television that listens to you.
Hi, I'm Johnnie Burrell. Welcome to the program.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is London Breed, and I'm the supervisor for this amazing district. So welcome. You can clap. I'm on stage. I feel like a star right now, but I know we came here to deal with some serious business. I appreciate all of you folks who are here, but more importantly, I appreciate the people that are here today on this panel. These are some incredible experts in so many fields. This forum came about because since I've been in office, I get calls almost on a daily basis of folks in this district who are going through some sort of crisis around an eviction, a rent increase. There are a lot of challenges out there, and sadly, I've faced that same challenge with my building being recently sold and my future being uncertain. And that shouldn't happen. Your home is your castle, is where you feel protected, it's where you feel safe, and all over San Francisco, not just in District 5, people are struggling and people are living in fear, and people want to make sure that the city is doing their job, but more importantly, the city is funding a lot of resources, and we today have brought those resources to the community, and that's what today is about, is making sure that information is out there, because information is key. Knowing what your rights are, knowing what's available, knowing what the options are, that is what's going to help to make sure that we protect San Franciscans. We've been working on a lot of legislation, and what I'm really most proud of is today the mayor actually signed legislation, our neighborhood preference legislation. And the reason why I'm so proud of this legislation is because growing up in this community, I watched as we built housing everywhere, a lot of affordable housing, and the folks who moved into this affordable housing were not people that I grew up with. And it wasn't to say that those folks were not welcomed in the community, but I didn't understand why we were asked to support this affordable housing, why we were told this affordable housing was for us, but we didn't get access to this affordable housing. And so now with our neighborhood preference legislation, when we build affordable housing in any district, the folks who live in that district, 40% of those units, the folks who live in that district will have right of first refusal, and I'm really proud of that legislation. We have a lot of work to do. But tonight, we're here to talk about solutions. We're here to talk about what we can do to make sure that each and every one of you feels empowered to know what your rights are, and also what's out there. The city's affordable housing program. How can you qualify? How can you help your friends qualify? What is out there? And more importantly, how are we going to make sure that we keep people in their homes? So tonight we have some amazing panelists. You guys look really happy tonight. I'll have them introduce themselves, but I want to start with especially Tommy, who I know is a beast. He is hardcore. He is the housing rights guru. He's with the Housing Rights Committee. He has a wealth of information. He's somebody that our office constantly uses for advice. He's amazing when it comes to tenants' rights and tenants' protection, and he is going to have a wealth of information. He's here to not only talk on this panel about some of the challenges, but more importantly, he will be here to meet with you. We also have Brian from the Mayor's Office of Housing, because there are a lot of great opportunities. 555 Fulton Street, which is located on Fulton and Laguna. If you're a single person who makes no more than, I think, $71,000 a year, you can possibly buy a home for $200,000 or $300,000. That's the affordable units that are going to be available at 555 Fulton. And we have to make sure now with the neighborhood preference that people in this district apply for those units so that they can get access to those units. Brian is here from the Mayor's Office of Housing. He can talk about more of the opportunities that could be available to you. Deborah Walker is on the Department of Building Inspection, and it is, I don't know what I want to say about the Department of Building Inspection. They are definitely a challenging bunch, and we have We have someone here from the rent board, the deputy director, and they, all of the folks here, I'll have them definitely introduce themselves, but they have a wealth of information for each and every one of you. They are going to go through what's available, and then they're happy to answer questions, but we're also here to answer questions privately. So after we're done with this panel, we will be here to answer your questions as well. And finally, I want to just tell you that tomorrow I'm going to make an incredible announcement. Some of you are familiar with the NCT, the Neighborhood Commercial Transit District legislation that I helped to get passed along with my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors for the Divisadero and the Fillmore corridor, which did not increase the height, but it allowed for more density. So instead of a 2,000 square foot unit, you could build somewhere around a 700 to 1,200 square foot unit, which basically has provided more density so that we can have more housing. And a smaller housing unit means that it's more than likely more affordable. Well, we're going to do even more than that. And tomorrow I have an incredible announcement. I wish I could share it with you tonight, but tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll be in front of the Harding announcing what we're going to do around affordability. I'm really excited about that. So I will finally say that this is a tough job. But we have an opportunity to do some great things. There's not a one-size-fits-all. This problem was not created overnight. So the solutions to our affordable housing crises and what happens all over the city, we are going to need time to fix it. We're going to need a plan to fix it, and we're going to need to come together to fix it. And bringing information to the community is so important to making sure that you are well informed and you're a part of the process in helping us do that. So with that, we're going to get started, and I'm going to thank everyone for being here tonight, and I want to get started with Tommy. And if you could just, go through whatever you want to say, talk about rights and all the stuff that we want to know about. I'm
10
really
minutes?
take as much time as you need, because I know there's a lot going on in that brain of yours. So thank you, Tommy, for being here. Thank you, everyone else, and we'll be here all night.
Okay, so my name is Tommy Avicoli Mecca. I'm with the Housing Rights Committee. We have a banner over there and some information, including my card, because I know my name is very difficult to spell, but there's a card there with my name, so you got the correct spelling. So I've been doing this work for a long time, almost 20 years. I got involved in the 90s, the mid-90s, when the first dot-com boom hit. I live in the Castro, not far from here, down Castro a little bit. And I got involved because suddenly I noticed two things were happening to my neighborhood as the tech boom was taking off and rent started going up. I noticed two things were happening. Number one, a lot of my friends with AIDS in the neighborhood were getting evicted. And two, there were suddenly a lot of homeless queer kids on Castro Street, hanging out all the time. I was working at a different light bookstore at the time, which was on Castro near 18th. And suddenly the merchants and a lot of the neighbors were going crazy because there were all these kids on the street, but they were kids who were victims of the rising rents and the inability to be able to afford to rent. And they were coming here from cities all over the country where they were getting beaten up and harassed for being queer. So I got involved because I've been an activist since 1970 when I came out of the closet. I'm older than I look. But I came out in 1970. I got involved with the gay liberation movement. I had been a draft dodger before that because I wouldn't go to the Vietnam War and kill people. I've been a lifelong resistor to war. And I had also marched in civil rights marches in Philly, and I marched with the Black Panthers when they were protesting universities coming into black communities and taking land and expanding their universities. So I have a long history of activism. And I got involved in the Tenants movement in the late 90s because I saw an injustice happening all around me, helped organize 3 shelters for homeless queer youth, set up a food program, and then also a shower project. Brian remembers this, I know, because he was the director of Lyric, which is an LGBT youth group in the Castro. So that's how I got started in this work. And then in the year 2000, I got hired by the Housing Rights Committee. Housing Rights Committee is a tenants' rights organization, but we also do affordable housing advocacy, and we do organizing. We actually organize tenants to fight back when they're being faced with evictions. Our organization started in 1979 at a place called Old St. Mary's Church. I wasn't living here then, so I'm not sure where that is exactly, but they were originally called the Old St. Mary's Housing Committee. And it was basically a group of seniors who were facing evictions at the time, because at that time the big issue was condo conversions, and a lot of landlords were using condo conversions as a way of pushing out seniors and long-term tenants. And these seniors started organizing, and it was their organizing that eventually got the Board of Supervisors to pass our current condo limit, the limits on condo conversions. So we can thank these folks for giving us the condo conversion law, which we have, which has been very effective in stopping a lot of evictions. So they organized, and eventually at some point they changed the name of the Housing Rights Committee, and unfortunately I don't know why or how that happened, but it happened. So one of the big things we do is we offer counseling for tenants, and that's for all tenants, no matter what type of housing you live in. If you live in an apartment, if you're a renter, we will try to help you. There will be some cases where we won't be able to help you, like if you live in a co-op or something, it gets a little more difficult to figure out what the rules are and what your rights are. But if you live in subsidized housing, Section 8 public housing, if you live in TNDC, THC, any of that subsidized housing, we can help you. If you live in rent-controlled, non-rent controlled units, we can help you. We have a clinic Monday through Thursday, 1 to 5. You can either drop in the office or call. And again, our information's there. We're in the Mission on South Van Ness, 417 South Van Ness. If you have public housing or Section 8, you do need to make an appointment, because we have specialists who handle those. Not all our counselors know Section 8 in public housing, because the rules are different and can get a little bit complicated. So we have specialists who will help you, but you need to make an appointment with them. So that's one component of what we do, and we're really proud of that, because we try to not put any hurdles for people to get in touch with us or to come into our clinic. They can, as I said, you can call, you can drop in, and we will try to help you. We also do organizing, and this, for me, this is one of my loves, of course, is organizing. Because if you come in, and this is a very common scenario, your building's being sold, and your old landlord was a really great person, and you really got along with that person, and maybe that landlord didn't even raise your rent over the years, but suddenly you've got this new unknown person or entity. It could be an LLC, it could be a speculator, it could be an investor from another country who's come in here to flip buildings and make millions of dollars, which we see all the time. But suddenly you have this unknown, and you have all these questions and fears because your building's being sold, and you've heard all the horror stories because they've been in the media. What do? You come into our office. Seriously, I want you to come into our office, you and maybe a couple other people from your building. It doesn't have to be everybody in your building, but I want you to come into our office, but I also want you to commit yourself to organize the other tenants in your building. I want you to talk to all the tenants in your building, and I want you to let them know that you're going to come into our office and that you're going to invite us to come to your building and meet with all of you and talk to you about what your rights are and how you can fight whatever might come down the pike. Okay? It's very important. When your building's being sold, don't panic and get panicky to the point where you feel helpless and you don't do anything. Organize. Remember the old saying, don't mourn, organize? Well, this is don't panic, organize. Because you can save your building. And I'm going to give you 2 examples of cases where I helped people save their housing. One was 3 Latina mothers, I speak Spanish, 3 Latina mothers who came into my office. One day they had, I'm forgetting, 5 or 7 children, I think, between the 3 of them. They lived in a single family house that was divided into 3 parts. The people from DBI should shut their ears because they were illegal units. There were 2 illegal units in the building. I'm just joking. And so, but it was 3 units. And under rent control, as Robert will attest, it doesn't matter that the other 2 units were illegal because this building was under rent control. It was built before 1979, and even though it was technically only 1 unit, it was being rented as 3 units, so it was under rent control. But they were being, I know what happened. The owner lost the building to a foreclosure, and now the bank was coming around and telling these mothers they had to get out because they had no right to be there because 2 of the units were illegal, and therefore they all had to leave. And if they didn't leave, they were going to call the cops on them. So they came in and they were all crying in my office, and I told them, no, you don't have to leave. So what we did ultimately, I got together with Causa Justa, which is another group in the mission that specifically serves the Latino community. I wanted to get them involved as well. So what we did was we held a press conference outside the bank, which happened to be at 16th and Mission, which was great for us. And what we did was we got the kids excused from school for the day, and the children drew up a big letter in English and Spanish that we blew up. And so we do this press conference. We told all the media that the children were going to present this letter to the bank. And what the letter said in English and Spanish was, please do not evict our families because we have nowhere to go and we will be homeless. I mean, talk about tugging at heartstrings and talk about, I knew exactly what we were doing. So the media is like there in droves. And the bank played right into our hands because instead of letting the children in, which would have been the logical thing to do, the bank manager shut the door, locked it, and stood there going like this to the kids. And there's all these little adorable kids with this big letter standing in front of the door trying to get in to present her with this letter, and she wouldn't let them in. And all the media, and we had the New York Times there, we had all this media there. The media swarmed in and took shots of these little kids trying to present this letter to this mean woman behind the glass doing this. Well, within 2 hours after our press conference, I get a call from the bank, a very irate call from a lawyer, one of the lawyers for the bank, saying to me, how dare I say that they're trying to evict these mothers when they're not trying to evict these mothers. And so I said, excuse me a moment, let me go in my file. I said, I'm looking at this unlawful detainer that has your name on it, your bank's name on it, so you are suing these 3 mothers for eviction. And you're telling me what? That you're not evicting them? And she's like, well, I don't know who did that. They weren't authorized to issue that unlawful detainer. Well, the bottom line was by the end of the day, that unlawful detainer was withdrawn. We stopped the eviction. So sometimes tactics like that work really well. I find that basically the court of public opinion is our greatest ally because we can't trust Superior Court when it comes to tenants issues. Sometimes we win, sometimes we don't, but generally I don't trust the courts. But I trust the court of public opinion because here in San Francisco, you have to, I can't imagine there's anybody in this city really who could watch their TV and see these 3 mothers and these little kids with this note standing in front of this bank because they're being evicted and not feel a whole lot of compassion and pathetic. And so, again, I urge you, organize. The other big example is 1049 Market, which is 83 units. Live-work lofts, built in converted to live-work in the 90s, but they didn't quite convert them, so the units, anyway, that's a whole other story about the legality of units. But the bottom line was somebody buys the building, and again, he tries to do an eviction. We went public, and we also went to the city and asked the city for help. And the combination of Jane Kim's office doing an amazing job of helping those tenants, because the tenants in her district, and us going very, very public, and it was on the front page of the Examiner, and the combination has really helped, and it's 2 years now, and not all the tenants, because some of the tenants did take buyouts, but the tenants who wanted to stay are still in their units 2 years later. And when I started that fight and started organizing those tenants, everybody, including the lawyers, the tenant attorneys I called for advice, everybody told me I could not win this case, that the tenants would have to settle for a buyout and maybe more time to leave, but there was no way to stop the evictions. And I'm going to sit here and tell you, 2 years later, these tenants are still in their units, and we are going to keep them in their units forever. And this guy's going to back down at some point, and I'm going to make sure he does.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you again, Tommy. Now we will have Robert Collins, who's the Deputy Director of the Rent Board. Robert, if you could present and talk about what the Rent Board does.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's a tough act to follow. We're a lot more dry than that at the Rent Board. I'm just going to explain what we do. But you'll know the Rent Board because we're usually in the middle of a lot of controversy around these issues. Just tonight we're trying to deal with some of the changes to the Kim Eviction 2.0 amendments, and that's why several of us could not be here with you. The director wanted to actually be here with you tonight, but she's actually trying to handle those things. So what I want to give you is an overview of what the Rent Board does. So I'm Robert Collins. I'm the Deputy Director. I've been with the Rent Board for about 18 years or so. The Rent Board, as Tommy, so bear with me a moment. I'm going to be a little bit dry and try to clarify, what does the Rent Board do in San Francisco? Tommy alluded to it with his stories as to when it touches the Rent Board, but you have many different departments here. And for the city, we all do a slightly different thing. And I think it's very confusing for those of you out there, as President Breed had said before, knowing what's out there as far as resources. So the Rent Board is a law that covers certain units in San Francisco, and it prevents increases that exceed certain amounts. And it also prevents evictions of tenants unless there's a just cause for the eviction. Can you hear me okay? Is this too? Okay. So it basically covers buildings built before June 13, 1979, which was the effective date of the ordinance when it was originally passed by the Board of Supervisors. Back then, it was signed into law by then Mayor Dianne Feinstein, and we've seen a lot of changes to rent control in those 35 years. And so again, it covers most of the housing stock that was built before June 13, 1979. Now, there are some big exceptions from price controls that have come into being in 1996 and thereafter for single-family homes and condominiums. So some of those units are not covered for price controls, and that's a major change to that rent control. So how does it work? Basically, rent control in San Francisco plays within the context of different state laws that limit, the procedures and process for a tenancy or terminating a tenancy in California, but it establishes further protections for tenants. It establishes protections of annual increases every year, and so there's an annual increase that is published by the office, and it is 60% of the consumer price index for the San Francisco Bay Area. Now that's 60%, so it's not the full CPI, and then in addition to that, landlords can come in and ask for an increase based on putting a new roof on the building, or doing a soft-story seismic retrofit, or just because their costs have gone up, or a number of other things like that. It also establishes a situation where the tenant can come in and ask for a rent reduction when the landlord doesn't make repairs that are needed. And so in some ways, a tenant could very likely be going to Tommy and getting advice to call DBI and then heading into our office. And DBI might come out and cite the lack of heat, for example. But the tenant could also come into our office and ask for a reduction in the rent for the time that the heat is not working, as long as it's more than a reasonable period of time. So the landlord gets a right to correct the violation, but if they don't, then the law sets up a situation where the tenant can come in for an additional decrease. It also set up eviction controls. So in San Francisco, in a rent-controlled unit, there are 16 causes to evict a tenant, and one exception to those. Basically things like non-payment of rent, habitual late payment of rent, breach of lease, nuisance, illegal use of the unit, failure to renew an agreement, failure to provide the landlord access as required under state law, unapproved subtenants, and those are the fault evictions, pretty much. And there's another almost equivalent number of no-fault reasons, and there are things like owner move-in, condominium conversion, demolishing, or a capital improvement temporary eviction. So those are some examples. I guess I should introduce first of all and say that I'm here from the Rent Board. You have several people from DBI. I have we have Jennifer in the back. Jennifer has a bunch of information materials. Jennifer supervises the public information unit. So she's the one that's supervising all the counselors that are interacting with all of San Francisco's public every day. She is the supervisor for the unit that's really the face of the agency. We have another unit that is the administrative law judges, the hearings unit, and that's the unit that makes decisions and conducts hearings and so forth. But Jennifer and I both will be out there after this to answer any questions that you would have and try to clarify some of these laws, which are pretty complex, I'm afraid. So some of the things the Rent Board does is we determine the amount of interest on security deposits. We help define some of the SRO hotel visitor policies, and we conduct various other hearings and similar issues. The way the Rent Board works is we have a big counseling unit, or for us it's big, it's 11 people, 11 counselors, and we have a call center that you can call into every day to get your questions answered, typically from 9 to noon and 1 to 4. It's a very good resource given the complexity of the housing laws that we have. I think if you haven't called it and you have a problem, it's a good starting point. We might well refer you to Tommy over at the Housing Rights Committee, or to the SFAA if it's a landlord issue, or to any number of other organizations that are out there, the Tenants Union, the small property owners, and we have a plethora of referrals, but it's a great place to sort of start with some of these problems. If you're having a problem with eviction, if you're having a problem with a rent increase, and it's a rent-controlled unit. We also conduct, so the actual mandate of the organization, of the agency, is to actually regulate the rents, so in rent-controlled units. So the agency conducts hearings to determine what the proper rent is, because either there was an illegal rent increase, or because the landlord is filing because they maybe made some improvements to the property, or as we had said, for a reduction in services because something wasn't done, some repairs weren't done, or a variety of other things. Now, housing services is something that's a very broad definition, so we get petitions because there's no heat. We also get petitions because somebody took away somebody's garage, storage, any number of other services, or is failing to allow the person to have a replacement roommate, for example. So the list is quite broad as to what can be encompassed in that. So that's really the majority of the work that we do in the hearings unit, is have hearings that determine the amount of rent. Other things that we have a lesser role in are, for example, evictions. So evictions are actually, the process is defined by state law. And the process is that the landlord has to give the tenant a notice. And in San Francisco, in a rent-controlled unit, that notice has to have one of those 16 just causes. But the next step in that process is an unlawful detainer in Superior Court. And we've got someone here from the Eviction Defense Collaborative that helps people answer their unlawful detainers, for example, or it helps tenants. But so because the process is defined in state law, and the agency or the body that makes that decision is Superior Court, evictions don't generally come to us. Tenants can file if they think they're being evicted illegally for us to investigate, but our investigation ends when an unlawful detainer is filed, because the court ultimately has the legal duty and responsibility to make the decision as to whether the tenant can remain there or not. But the just causes are within our rent ordinance. We are, let me go one more step. So that's the counseling unit, the hearings unit, and then the top step. If somebody, let's say a tenant files a petition or a landlord files a petition, it doesn't matter, and the judge, the administrative law judge, issues a decision. If they're unhappy with that decision, they can appeal that decision to the Rent Board Commission. And the Rent Board Commission is appointed, and it is made up of equal parts landlords and tenants. So there's 2 landlords, 2 tenants, and a neutral on the commission. So as you can imagine, we get a lot of controversy from both sides as we try to play that central role of supporting what is a tenant protection law, but carrying out that law in a neutral way. So that is the Rent Board Commission. And one more thing I will say is we're extremely cognizant, aware, and committed of to language access. We have a very diverse community in San Francisco, and on a daily basis we hire interpreters and we translate almost every document we have into multiple languages. In the case of the hotel visitor policy, we've translated it into Gujarati, Hindi, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Spanish. If you have folks out there that you know that could benefit from our services but think that it's inaccessible, we do make every effort to be accessible to the whole of San Francisco's community. So how do rent increases work? Again, just a basic primer, and we can get into the details. It's based on 60% of CPI, the Consumer Price Index for the San Francisco Bay Area. Additional increases are allowed if the landlord petitions the rent board generally, but not always, for bond pass-throughs, for capital improvements, for operating and maintenance increases, and various other more arcane laws, which I'll omit for now, but we can talk about later on if you have specific questions. As far as evictions, the law says that every eviction notice in San Francisco, except for 3-day non-payment of rent notices, have to be filed with our agency. And so we get a lot of eviction notice filings. We also investigate reports of alleged wrongful eviction, particularly useful if you've got a problem that you think you can resolve by having us get involved. That's not every problem that's going to be resolved, but some of them do get resolved at that level. After that, our law or the rent ordinance also requires relocation benefits in many of the evictions. So that's been a change over the last 20 years, where almost every eviction required very little as far as relocation payments. Today, there are significant payments for, well, significant is a relative term, I suppose. They would have been considered significant 20 years ago, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't. It depends on the situation, but it's about $5,700 per tenant in most no-fault evictions. Well, again, we're in the middle. We'll do whatever the Board of Supervisors tells us to do, but it's always controversial, and it depends on the situation, right? If somebody's been there 40 years, it certainly seems very little, and if somebody's been there a year, it seems a lot. Or maybe it depends on a variety of other things, but I'm sure there's a lot of strong opinions, as there usually are, around housing issues here. So some other things that we do have as part of our law, and that people don't generally think of, are a lot of laws that relate to roommates and getting roommates or adding family members to the unit and those kinds of things. So those have changed also significantly in the last, I'd say 15 years since the dot-com days. So today, the law clarifies that there is a right to a replacement roommate, for example, which was not clarified 20 years ago, 15 years ago, to add family members in. And again, the somewhat controversial Kim amendments that went into effect on November 7th that allow additional occupants up to another limit. So I think I'll leave it at that, and we'll answer questions. I think it is definitely our intention, and always has been, to be really available to the community. We realize how complicated rent control is. So I've tried to make it really simple here by offering you the most basic things, but the devil's in the details, and the details are incredibly complex. But you have a group of incredibly dedicated professionals in Public Information Unit, which do, I think, an amazing job in simplifying those details. And one of the things that I still find pretty amazing is you can actually make a phone call and get a human being that cares about resolving the problem. And it makes me happy to work in an organization that believes in that. Now, again, we're playing that sort of in-between role. So we're enforcing a tenant protection law in a way that's gonna withstand scrutiny by a commission that's made up of equal parts, and that's by intention. So those are, we have a different role than Tommy's role, for example, or many other organizations. But I think we can be useful in that regard in providing information and trying to demystify the rent control ordinance. So I urge you to use those services, and that's what we're there for, is to try to simplify it. That's a big part of what we do. Apart from deciding what the rent should be, a big part of what we're about is really being in communication with the community and answering questions and trying to be available. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much for that information. Now we will hear from Ryan Murphy. He's an attorney with the Eviction Defense Collaborative. Ryan?
Hi, thanks.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, of course. So, my name is Ryan Murphy. I'm a staff attorney that works at the Eviction Defense Collaborative. Some of our materials are over on that back table over there if you want to take a look. That's our 2014 annual eviction report, keeping some stats on the work that we do. So my job basically is to defend tenants facing eviction. As Robert and Tommy alluded to, it's a state process to evict a tenant. It's a complaint. It's called an unlawful detainer. So we always hear about the threats of eviction. My landlord's trying to evict me. I'm getting threats. Everybody's terrified of evictions in the city. What an eviction is the sheriff coming and evicting you from your house. That's the only person that can actually evict you from your house is the sheriff. The sheriff can only do that pursuant to a court order. Somebody has to go to court to get that order. Landlord's got to go to court to get that order. Our office does everything we can to stop them from getting that order, essentially. When the process begins, after an eviction notice is served, the landlord has to file a complaint. That complaint is called an unlawful detainer. The tenant has an extremely short period of time of which to respond to that. They only have 5 days. They come to our office. That is pretty much where every tenant in the city comes when they get an unlawful detainer complaint, is they come to our drop-in clinic, which is at 6th and Market, but only for another month, because we actually ourselves are getting evicted. So we actually are now moving to 10th and Mission. So that's another story for another, not here. But anyway, so tenants come into to the drop-in clinic. We're open 9:30 to 11:30. And 1 to 3 p.m. every day that the court is open, we are open helping tenants. And we will help you do your paperwork. I mean, in an ideal situation, every tenant would have a lawyer to respond to the lawsuits that's been filed against them, because almost every case in Superior Court is filed by every unlawful detainer case filed in Superior Court is filed by a landlord that has an attorney. So it's a bit of an unfair fight, but we will help anybody that comes through our doors and help them file a response, because if they don't file a response within that 5-day period of time, they will automatically lose the case and they will get default entered against them. So you got to act fast. We are an extremely busy clinic. Let me step back. Some of the other things that we do besides helping people with the paperwork is we also represent tenants at trial, because essentially every unlawful detainer case heads to trial. That's the judicial process. Before the landlord can get that court order to evict somebody, there has to be a trial where the landlord has to prove his or her case. So our office, on top of helping tenants file their paperwork so they don't just automatically lose in Superior Court, we will also represent them in their trials. We don't have enough resources to represent every tenant that deserves getting representation. Just a couple weeks ago, I can think of one example where we have to pick. We don't have enough people to take cases even though they're deserving, and the person would definitely benefit from having an attorney in court, because it's hard to get through court without a lawyer that knows how to navigate the process. And because this person didn't have a lawyer, they had to move out. I mean, they didn't really have a fighting chance. And we probably would have taken that case had we had enough resources to help with it. It was very discouraging. But in any event, if you are unlucky enough to find yourself served with one of those summons and complaints for unlawful detainer, our office will be able to assist you. And yeah, I encourage you to look at our materials, and I think there's a Q&A after this, so we can, these other experts, we can help with whatever you want.
Thank you, Ryan. Do you charge the tenants?
The EDC does charge tenants for services, but it's a sliding fee scale.
All right, folks, I know we want to get to questions. We just have 2 more departments, and I wanted to make sure that we got the information out there. And again, we will do a short Q&A, but I know that some of you may want to have your private time with your individual questions, so we will also have time after we're done with the panel to answer your questions as well. So just wanted to make sure. And with that, I want to introduce Deborah Walker and Rosemary Vasquez from Department of Building Inspection. Welcome.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor Breed, for putting this together, and thank you all for coming. My name is Deborah Walker, and I'm the tenant representative on the Building Inspection Commission. It's a body that is appointed both by the president of the board and the mayor. Each person represents a certain constituency out there. I'm the tenant rep, there's a landlord rep, there's builder reps, there's general public reps. Our job is to manage through the director, the Department of Building Inspection. And we talk about policy, we talk about working better with other departments. Our department works with the Department of Health, Mayor's Office of Housing, Fire Department, and we actually have created and fund, not enough, but hopefully more, a code enforcement outreach program which includes tenant organizations as well as landlord organizations to help resolve issues around habitability and safety of our built inventory in the city. There's a lot of moving parts in our department. I'm not going to talk very long because Rosemary Bosky's here, who has more information specifically about housing. But what we are focused on is making sure we have a national model for our housing division because of the advocacy of organizations like Tommy's and because of the work of our housing division. We have a very effective code enforcement outreach. We have an inventory of old buildings we want to protect. These are the buildings that are rent controlled. I'm sure anybody who lives in San Francisco knows that the threat of fire with these wood buildings is extreme and severe. We need to be proactive. In this city, we're all close together, so if there's one building burning, it's really likely the one next door is going to be at risk. There's a lot of reasons why we need to be a lot more proactive here than in some other cities, and I think that we are setting examples in our department. We have a really, our CEOP program has a really good history of success of if there's an issue of mold or no heat or leaky roofs or some issues that tenants have, they can go through our code enforcement partners, which include Housing Rights Committee, several other of our tenant organizations, and the Apartment Owners Association, who actually engage together to try and work out resolutions so that the problems get fixed. It also, the CEOP program also provides a contact if you are nervous about calling the Department of Building Inspection, which a lot of people are. We are being very forward-thinking about what I like to call unpermitted units. Others call illegal units. There's tens of thousands of units in this city that are not on the books. And if you're a tenant in one of these, you can be nervous. You can actually, what we've been noticing is that people are taking out permits to take the unit off, to demolish the unit essentially. And we worked with, Tommy brought it to the attention of of the Building Inspection Commission. We then told the Board of Appeals, who then told the Board of Supervisors. See, it's complicated even for us. But now tenants get noticed whether they're in an illegal unit or a legal unit when there is going to be work that will cause them to be displaced. And what we want to do in our city, what we are focused on at our commission level, is programs to keep these units on living, people living in these units, to prevent evictions, to keep the people living in them, and to keep these units and legalize them. That is our priority in this city. We are trying to aim not just programs and projects at it, but actually create funding to encourage landlords to do this. We have, like I said, tens of thousands of units that are homes to people that we would like to keep as homes. So I'm going to turn it over to Rosemary Bosky, who can tell you about our program. And we've also got some folks that she'll introduce and some materials here. I will be here afterwards too. I want to thank you for coming again. And Rosemary, can you give more details about our housing division especially?
Thank you, Commissioner Walker. Well, I oversee the housing division of the Department of Building Inspection. I've been in that division and dealing with code enforcement in the city. Next December, it'll be 30 years. And I want to commend Supervisor Breed, because this is, even though this is an incredibly challenging time as far as evictions, it's actually a golden era with respect to legislation that really is moving forward as far as putting protections in the codes that are helping with notification and things like that. I will get 3 or 4 calls a week from supervisors' aides about the nuance of how certain things can be constructed so that they can be strong, helpful mechanisms for both tenants and landlords. Since we've got 300,000 units in the city that are aging as we speak, it's very challenging. So the housing division originally was part of the health department many years ago. I will tell you that the housing inspector, the makeup of the housing inspector and their background has now changed. We recently, with the leadership of Director Huey and our commission, Commissioner Walker, have changed the job description so that we now have embedded within the housing division individuals who were within community groups, both landlord and tenant, so they have a much better perspective of the challenges of both groups. In fact, one of the things that we see is that we have to manifest presence to make sure that our notices of violation get abated. So what do we do? What can we do for you in this trying time? Well, the first thing that we do is the housing code is a very broad code. It overlaps with both the health code and the fire code. And so we are probably the only division or entity within the city and county of San Francisco that will write a 34-page notice of violation for, say, a residential hotel or a very badly maintained apartment building. Not all are like that, but those that are have habitability issues and quality of life issues that, as we know, are very, very bad for the individual occupants. So I have currently 22 inspectors, 5 senior housing inspectors, and they're all out there on a daily basis, most of which have district assignments, but I have some that exclusively deal with city attorney task force cases and city attorney referrals. We probably refer more cases to the city attorney than anyone, and we are very diligent in documenting the conditions that you may find yourselves within. We work very closely with Tommy and Housing Rights. As Commissioner Walker indicated, we actually fund Causa Justa and Housing Rights and others within the context of the habitability issues, and we will go into a building with them, and in those instances where somebody may be afraid to make a complaint directly to us, we will coordinate an inspection so that if we need to go into every unit because people want us to go in and see the conditions, we will coordinate that, and then we will write a notice of violation. And all of this is transparent. We do have this information online so that you can see see the action as it goes through the process, and you can even look up your particular building to see what permits have been filed or what complaints have been filed on the property. Now, we realize as housing inspectors that the moment we leave a building that is particularly not very well maintained, that conditions can change. So that's why we recognize that we have to come at this problem in many different ways, hence the Code Enforcement Outreach Program, and also that we fund the SRO collaborators that deal with the residential hotels. Again, a very old housing stock, high density, and houses a lot of individuals. So we spend a tremendous amount of time dealing with that. But let me also tell you that if you have an experience with DBI where you feel that, say, a housing inspector didn't call an item that you thought should have, or closed a case when you thought that they shouldn't have, I invite you to go up the chain of command to the senior or myself, and we'll be more than happy to talk with you about that, and or work with our outreach partners to try and come up with a solution to whatever the situation is. I will also tell you that the housing code has evolved over the years. Somebody mentioned mold and mildew. The San Francisco Housing Code actually has a definition for that, which you won't find in very many other jurisdictions, and I will get a lot of calls about that. And we will typically, even though that's typically what you might think as a health code issue, the health department will refer those cases to us. We're also dealing with environmental factors such as lead, dust, noise, and other things that go beyond, say, the housing division into their electrical, plumbing, building divisions as well. So we're here to help. I'm always looking and listening at the other things that we can do as far as code amendments and things like that. For example, I chair the SRO task force. We just finished with the Fire Safety Task Force, which I also chaired, where we came up with some recommendations that we're going to be giving the board on how the fire department and DBI can work, even though we've worked well together, work more effectively and look at the types of provisions that have been in the housing code for since the 1960s, such as the fire alarm systems that if they go off, you might not hear them in your unit. So that is up on our website. We invite you to take a look at that. But as I say, we're constantly looking at those ways that we can help your experience and make sure that you have clean, safe, and sanitary housing. And with that, I know you want to get to the question and answers. I'm here. I have Robert Wallers, who's one of my inspectors. We'll be more than happy to answer any individual questions you might have. And we've got a lot of information there. We also have, if you want to know whether or not something is within our jurisdiction, we have a maintenance checklist that's got 36 items on it that goes out to the property owners that they're supposed to maintain on a yearly basis. We have that for you so you can look through that and say, oh, my building has this within it. Please give us a call or call Tommy or Kazuhusta, and we'll be more than happy to help you.
Rosemary. And last but not least, we have Brian here from the Mayor's Office of Housing to talk about the opportunities that exist all over the city. We are building more and more affordable housing. We are requiring that developers with their own private properties build more and more affordable housing. And we want to make sure that people know how to get access to this housing. So Brian is going to speak briefly. I know this is like information overload right now, so he's going to be very brief. But again, all of these individuals will be here for the next hour after this panel has been completed to answer your individual questions directly. Brian?
Thanks, Supervisor. So thank you again for putting this together. I think it's even though we've talked a lot about tenant rights issues throughout the city, I think it's the first time that our department actually has been on a panel with the Rent Board and DBI and with community-based organizations. So I think it's a great model to get this information out in a kind of a one-stop shop sort of setting. So I will keep my remarks brief. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the resources that we offer, especially on the eviction prevention side, and then I'm going to ask Rosa Hernandez just very briefly come and talk a little bit about the access to housing that we offer. So our department really has a couple of different primary functions. So one is most visibly the financing of multifamily housing. So as you all know, we passed the housing bond recently that will provide over $300 million of additional dollars to provide affordable housing. So we're very excited about that. Another portion of our shop funds organizations to provide eviction prevention and tenant counseling. So for example, groups like Housing Rights Committee and Eviction Defense Collaborative are funded through our department. We fund a number of different groups throughout the city, groups that focus specifically on veterans issues, people living with HIV, groups like Legal Assistance for the Elderly, AIDS Housing Alliance, Hamilton Family Center for homeless families, a variety of organizations, many of whom provide their services for free or on a sliding scale fee. In the back, we have another staff member, Hugo Ramirez, and we have, if you don't take anything else from what I'm saying with you, please take the San Francisco Housing Resource Guide with you. We put together a booklet with all of the organizations that we found are most commonly asked for. It has a description of all of their services, whether it's eviction prevention, domestic violence services, rental assistance, help filling out applications. All of the names, the contact information, the hours are found in this pamphlet. We have it in English, we have it in Chinese, in Spanish, and Tagalog also. So please take that with you. The other part of what our office does is actually oversee the below market rate program that many of you have heard of. As you may know, when a market rate developer builds housing, they need to set aside a certain percentage of their units for below market rate projects, or they can pay a fee, which we use those funds then to create affordable units. We have a program that administers certain preferences, because it is very difficult, very competitive to get into our units, as Supervisor Breed mentioned. We have a program that issues certificates for people that were displaced by redevelopment activity. Supervisor Breed sat on that commission, so she knows that for 50 years people have been waiting to move back to the city, especially people from the Western Addition and from the Bayview area. So we administer that program. We've also administered a program that offers certificates to people that have been Ellis acted out. We've seen that more and more. As the supervisor mentioned, most recently the board took action to create a program for a neighborhood preference that will be rolled out early next year. We're very excited about that. And we also added an additional category, so those people who have been forced out through owner move-ins. That's another thing that we've been seeing, I think, growing almost at an even faster rate than Ellis Act. So those folks also will have access to these programs. So please come to us as we go through. So let me just give a few minutes to Rosa, and she'll give you a little more information about some of our access to housing work.
Thank you. I think he did a pretty good job of pretty much covering it, but I do want to mention that the resource guide is really valuable, and the very first page, it explains how to use the guide. There's very many organizations that do great work actually in the community, and we support them. We refer people to them because they're in the trenches with you all. So it's important to realize what the city does and does not do. We don't have direct placement. We don't do some of this, advocacy, because we have agencies that do that, and they do great work. So by all means, this is a wealth. This is almost an embarrassment of riches here, because these are amazing people that do amazing work. Another thing that we do with Mayor's Office of Housing is we, beyond the basics that Brian covered, I also brought, besides the resource guide, there's this page, and it talks a little bit about the different agencies that do housing, counseling agency, not just in terms of looking for housing, but for people that are looking to buy. I know it sounds like maybe a pipe dream to talk about owning a house in San Francisco, but that is a way to secure housing. And BMR units are designed for people to, in my opinion, stay in San Francisco, especially San Franciscans to stay in San Francisco. There's a lot of information about the BMR program, so I really invite you to go to the website. Our website has a lot of information. The resource guide is actually printed directly from the front page of our website. So you can always go back to sf-moh.org. And not only is our website available, not only does it have the resource guide available in all the languages that we, as a city, officially provide, which is English, Spanish, Tagalog, and Chinese, but the website itself can also be translated to any number of languages. I don't even know how many. So there really is a lot of information there, and it is thick. So I recommend you take your time to go through it. But those counseling agencies can help people figure out where are you, how close are you to buying a house, what do you need to do to get to the next step. Some of them are, for example, Consumer Credit Counseling Service, which can help you figure out just how to even get ready. Maybe you're not ready right now, but it doesn't mean you can't be. So there's a lot of different things to be considered here. Another page that I brought that looks kind of like this, it's a sort of matrix of the different programs that we offer through our office. Our office is actually largely a financing agency. So we do help people with what's called, for example, down payment assistance. That's a DALP program. BMR, that's a inclusionary housing program. We have a program called MALP, which is Mortgage Assistance Loan Program. And those are for people who are needing, so basically they're falling behind. We're working in every angle we can think of to try to help people stay in their housing. That's obviously the easiest, or not even the easiest, I don't scratch that, but there's nothing easy here. But that's an important place to start, is to keep people in their housing, and I think everybody in this panel agrees with that. So you'll see a matrix of all the different programs. There's a lot of information, and I don't want to get into it now because it's just going to overload you, but again, those counseling agencies that we have, we support them for the very purpose that you can go to them and get that kind of information. So that's a basic overview. There's, I know, probably a lot of questions that you all have, so I'll let you get to them. But again, please use our website. We try to keep it as updated as possible, and especially to reflect the situation of what's actually happening on the ground. So it's sf-moh.org. sf-moh.org. Those are all the languages I have.
Thank you very much.